This morning our readings come to us from Proverbs chapter 31 and also from Mark chapter 9. From Proverbs we read these words: "A capable wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She rises while it is still light and provides food for her household and tasks for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and makes her arm strong. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teachings of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her happy, her husband too, and he praises her. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is in vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her a share in the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the city gates. And now from the Gospel of Mark, we read, Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, Whoever welcomes one such a child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. This ends today's readings.
In reflection on our trip to Kenya to see the systems that they're using for developing clean water for the people of Kenya, I was so impressed with the staff of World Vision and the work that they're doing to bring clean water to the citizens of these rural areas in Matumo, especially where we were at.
After many hours of driving, we went to see the intake plant. When we got there, we walked to the riverbed, and what we saw was debris and trees, and it had completely washed out the intake. And it was just heartbreaking to see what the flood had done. And they were explaining what they were planning on doing with it and what they had done with it. This had been a 4-year project that they had worked on. And the thing that impressed me was the Alex, who is in charge of the World Vision there. Someone said, "You must have been just devastated." And he looked at us like a man who has faced many, many big challenges. And he said, "We just pray and we look for alternatives." So we went to see the pump house, and the pump house was at the bottom of the mountain, and that's where we saw the pump house. The idea is that water is going to be pumped from the river up to the top of the mountain. So from there we went to the top of the mountain to see the treatment plant, which there again, it was just amazing to see what they have accomplished. All the cement that was there, no machines close by. They were building a second holding tank done by hand with shovels. And so they explained to us how the treatment plant is working. And this treatment plant is going to serve thousands of villages and people. And so it's an important success of what World Vision is doing.
I saw the work that they were doing. It wasn't just drilling individual wells, but it was putting a system together that could handle clean water for a large number of people. And I was so impressed with that and the work that Wellspring has done with World Vision that I really have even a greater appreciation of the work that is being done. And that will encourage me to continue to support and give funding for these projects.
So as I have shared with you over the past couple of weeks what we saw and heard and felt and learned on our trip to Kenya, I would be remiss if I didn't spend some time talking about the spirit of the Kenyan people that we had the privilege of meeting. They were incredibly gracious to us. We were the strangers, and they welcomed us into their homesteads, into their workplaces. They opened up their lives for us to look at. I have said that the Kenyans we met were a very soft-spoken people, but I wouldn't mistake that for being soft. They are not soft. I could tell you about their resilience or their dedication to improving their lives and the lives of their children and their neighbors, their willingness to work hard, but I think it would be a whole lot more interesting if I just shared with you some of the stories that we brought back from Kenya. And I'll start with the story of Mbingo Minu, or as she invited us to call her, Kristen. And I'm so glad she invited us to call her that. Kristen is a grandmother. She raised her own children without the benefit of clean water. Now she has 4 grandchildren who live on her homestead with her. And you can maybe see that if you look closely, this building in the foreground here, that's a newer building that she has built recently. And then in the background, that's an older building that she has several buildings on her homestead like that. They're all small. They're about maybe 8 feet or 10 feet square. But that is where they sleep at night in those buildings. And there's no windows. There's just a door. But they go in there and they sleep. And she actually let us go into her building to see what it was like in there. And one thing I was glad to see was that every bed in there had a bed net on it. Remember when we did the big fundraiser for bed nets? And I asked about that, and one of the World Vision staff said, oh yes, everyone uses bed nets, and we have almost no malaria anymore in this area, which was really good to see. When we showed up at Kristen's homestead, she had these chairs that World Vision had borrowed to her, and she had them all set up under the shade of a tree, and she had swept the ground under the tree for our arrival. And every homestead we visited had done that. They had carefully prepared for us to come there. When asked to share the circumstances of her life, Kristen talked very animatedly about the before and the after regarding clean water. She has benefited greatly from the Catheny Borehole Community Water Project. This was a borehole that World Vision drilled that produced a great quantity of water. It supplies water to 5 schools, including the 2 that I talked about last week, as well as some community kiosks where people can go and purchase water, and even some pipelines to people's homesteads. And Kristen had a pipeline to her homestead. She saved up and she paid to have a pipeline bring water all the way to her yard. And you can see in this picture, we're all gathered around the faucet that is in her yard, in her homestead, that she was very proud of. And from what I understand, Kristen paid $30 or 3,000 Kenyan shillings for the privilege of having water to come to her homestead, and then she hand dug the trench that the pipe would be laid in several kilometers from where the main pipeline was to her homestead. In the 6 months or so that Kristen has had clean water, she said her life has seen a dramatic change. When we asked her how much difference clean water made in her life, the first thing she talked about was her grandchildren, and how her grandchildren aren't sick like her children were. And her grandchildren go to school every day because they're not sick and they don't have to look for water. So they're going to do better, she said, than her children were able to do. But then she started to talk about her businesses. In the 6 months that Kristen has been freed up from spending hours of every day walking for water, dirty water, she has expanded her garden to the point where her food production could be called farming. She has planted additional fruit trees, I think they were mango trees, and hardwood trees on her property. And she has gone into the brick making business. She mixes the red clay that is the soil that is everywhere there with water. She forms it into bricks by hand and then bakes those bricks. And as I mentioned earlier, she has used some of those bricks to expand the number of buildings on her homestead, and so far she has made, in 6 months, 1,500 bricks to sell. And she figured out that it costs her 2 cents in water to make a brick, and she can sell it for 8 cents. So she makes a profit, which she can use to better the circumstances of her family. She's also been able to build bigger and better pens for her goats and her cows, and she has the time to bring them to better grazing land. Someone in our group asked Kristen what her hopes or her dreams for the future were. And right away, with no hesitation, she said her big dream is to plant many more hardwood trees, a forest of hardwood trees, so she will always have enough wood to keep making her bricks, because that is her business. As I sat and listened to Kristen's story, this passage that we just heard from Proverbs about the good and noble woman kept running through my mind. There was something so noble about this grandmother who is working so hard using what is available to her to make a better life for her family. She also said that neighbors come to her homestead to get water from her so they don't have to walk as far, and they pay her what it costs her to get that water. As we talked to Kristen, the power of water to totally transform someone's life was so clear to us. And then we were taken to see and hear of the Athi River Project, and that was what Lois and Fred were talking about in the video. And there we saw the power of water in a little different way. This is a huge water producing project, one of the biggest ever undertaken anywhere in Africa, that World Vision US, World Vision Australia, and the Kitwe County government have undertaken together. They all work together for funding and for oversight to accomplish this project. The Athi River is one of the largest rivers in Kenya, and on the banks of the Athi River, we met Urbanus Mutiso, the overall manager of this river project. And he's there on the, what would that be? Thank you, left. And the woman that is standing in there was one of the women who, she is the chairperson of the committee, but she also donated land for this project to take shape. Urbanus lives in the Kamuti location, an area that will eventually receive clean water from this project. So he himself does not have clean water yet. And the plan is to pump water from the river into pre-sedimentation tanks that are located along the banks of the river. And after some of the dirt settles out of that water, then it is pumped almost 6 kilometers up to the top of Congo Hill, where it will be treated and purified. And then gravity will take that clean water back down to villages on the other side of that hill, and it will eventually supply 100,000 people with clean water. So it is a major project. Initially, Urbanus said a lot of work had to be done to convince landowners to donate their land. But once they understood how important clean water was, then they gave their land over to the project. The cement intake station in the river was built right on the edge of the river where the water was pumped from there to the sedimentation tanks. And then trenches were dug by hand up this hill that was kind of a low mountain. And they would drag those 10-inch steel galvanized pipes up that hill. Everything was done by hand. There were no trucks that could get in there anywhere. So they all did all this work by hand. And they would lay that pipe all the way up the hill, and then they had laid some pipe down the hill, and some places were actually receiving clean water as part of the test projects for this. I don't know if I can even describe how remote this area is. You saw the Land Cruiser on one of those roads. There's no truck that could get back there. The roads were so narrow and so bad. We had people that were asking to please stop and let them get out and walk because they were scared to drive on these roads with the Land Cruisers. It felt like you could just tip over. Up on top of the hill, the treatment facilities and storage tanks were also built without the benefit of any machinery. All of that cement that you saw in the structures was mixed by hand, and the areas where they were building those huge round storage tanks, that's rock, and they were digging and breaking that rock up by hand to get it out of there. They couldn't use any kind of explosive up there because it would damage some of the cement work that was already done. So they were doing all of that by hand to get that done. When they started the test program, 2,000 people, including 4 primary schools and a secondary school, were given access to clean water. And we met with one of the families who got clean water that way. But then February 24th of this year happened. And with it came record rainfall. Some of the older people in the region said they couldn't remember a rain like that since 1964. In addition, the rainy season was much longer than usual, and so that all combined to actually change the course of the river. So where we stood on the banks of the river was probably, 100 yards from where the bank of the river used to be. And the intake station that was on the edge of the river was now in the middle of the river. As we walked down there, we even saw hippopotamus tracks in the banks where the hippopotamuses had come up the river when it had flooded. So we were supposed to see this beautiful system being tested and in operation, and instead we saw the devastation. I think it might be the next slide. Yeah, you can see the devastation there of all of the debris, the plant debris, and waste that had come with the flooding of the river. Standing on the new banks of the river, we had the privilege of meeting with so many of the people who have worked on this project for 4 years, from the trench diggers and the pipe layers to the pump operators and the landowners that had given up their land, and Urbanus, who has been in charge of this project from the beginning, along with World Vision's engineers and hydrologists and project managers. And I stood there trying to imagine how disappointing this must have been for these people when that rain fell and all of their hard work seemed like it just kind of went down the river with the flood. Back on the fellowship tables, there are some pictures of Louise, one of the women who had benefited from clean water from this system as they were testing it out. And she lost the clean water when the flood happened as well. And what amazed me was that to a person, every single person that we talked to was so hopeful yet about the future. They were positive about what could still be done. On the banks of the river, when we heard that they had this huge setback, they were quick to assure us, but they'd been meeting ever since that flood. They had been meeting, and they now had Plan B. And Plan B would be able to accomplish the same goals, and if Plan B didn't work, they already had Plan C that they could go to. One way or another, they were going to get this system up and running. You could just see the resolve in them and the resilience that they had as they spoke about the sleepless nights listening to the rain and wondering how bad the damage would be, to when they would get up there and figure out what their next steps would be. The intake station may be rebuilt further up the river or further down the river, or they were talking about some kind of special porous pipes that they might use. I didn't understand what they were talking about, but I knew they understood it. And they were all hopeful about what they could do with that. That was one of, I think, one of the most meaningful days for me, was to see what, they were so ready to show us proudly what they had accomplished, and instead they had to show us just this devastating setback. And yet they did not lose a step. They were so committed to completing this project and bringing clean water to the people who were all waiting for it. So they thought it would set them back 6 months, but they will get back on track. And then finally, I would like to tell you a story of our last morning as we were leaving the Mutomo Area Development Project. We had the opportunity to visit another area development project, Kaluni, that had graduated from World Vision. This had been a very poor area in Kenya. It had high rates of malnutrition. It had very poor school performance, and there was no clean water anywhere within walking distance for this area. Now, school performance is so closely tied to clean water because, number one, if you're drinking this filthy water, you get sick, and so you miss school. But if you're not missing school because you're sick, you're missing school because you're out helping your mother find clean water for your family to drink that day. So a World Vision Area Development Project came into the Kaluni area, and they met with the villages for several months, and they came up together with a plan for what this particular area needed in order to survive and to thrive. And they identified that their greatest needs were clean water, education, hygiene, and better food source. So through World Vision, the village received fruit trees, which they planted orchards of fruit trees, which helped with their nutrition. But then several years ago, a borehole was drilled, and their borehole is solar powered, and it supplies 2 kiosks for the village and the primary school. And that's a picture of some of the children who attend that primary school. The school receives their clean water for free. Everyone else pays 2 shillings, which is roughly 2 cents, for a jerry can full of water from the kiosk. And in this way, they're able to pay to maintain all of the equipment that they need to continue for their borehole to operate efficiently. The Kaluni Project was able to meet all of their development goals that they had set with World Vision, and so World Vision pulled out, and now they are in charge. That community is in charge of their own destiny. They have their water committee that takes care of the borehole and the solar powered facility and all of the piping and the storage tanks and everything else. They are in charge of setting new goals for themselves and accomplishing those. It was wonderful to spend time with that development project area and just see the pride that they had in what they had accomplished. Their children are healthy. Their children are in school. Their children's school performance has increased dramatically, and they were so proud of that as they talked to us. I have been saying for the past 2 weeks that clean water is a basic necessity for life, and that makes it a justice issue. To do what we can to make sure that all people have clean water is part of what it means to follow Jesus Christ. It's part of what it means to love God and love God's people in this world. And I can say that just from reading my Bible. I did not have to go to Kenya to learn that. It's harder to put into words the impact that I felt going to a developing country like Kenya and meeting the Kenyan people. I was so taken by their struggle to simply survive, by their commitment to their families and their communities and their neighbors, their resilience in the face of difficulty, from Kristen's dedication to improving life for her family, to Urbana's resolve in completing this Athi River project, to the pride of the Kaluni Water Committee, who have taken on responsibility for their own community development. It was just so clear to me as I spent time there that providing the gift of clean water really is a partnership. It's not something we do for them. If we will provide the resource that they need, which is money, they need money, they can and they will do the rest. They will provide the engineers and the project managers and the pipe layers and the trench diggers and the teachers and the community organizers and the volunteers. They will provide all of the rest if they simply get the funding that they need in order to do these things. That is why I give to Wellspring, to support the work of World Vision in Africa. Would you please pray with me? Almighty God, we thank you for your love and your grace, which is evident all over our world. We thank you for your love and your grace, which really is enough if we will partner with you and care for one another. I thank you for the people that we met in Kenya, for the people who are now thriving with the gift of clean water, and I pray for the people who are still waiting and still hoping that one day soon their lives will change. I pray for the people who are working so hard to help their fellow neighbors, their communities, the community down the road. I pray for those who plan, who meet, who raise funds, who do all of what is necessary to turn Kenya from a developing country into a developed country. And I pray, God, that you would bless us, not only with generosity, but also with just a sense of solidarity with your people all around the world. As Jesus taught us, so we pray. Our Father, who art in heaven,